You are taking a live look over at the Israel-Gaza border this morning as we do get to the latest here out of the Middle East. I do want to take you to a statement. We brought you these comments just yesterday, live, raw, and unfiltered, but this is from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was speaking over in Israel just yesterday, where he spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Isaac Herzog, and the War Cabinet. And among his prepared remarks, Blinken said, quote, Israelis were dehumanized in the most horrific way on October 7th. The hostages have been dehumanized every day since, but he warned, quote, that cannot be a license to dehumanize others. Blinken speaking about the ongoing invasion of Gaza as Israeli troops look to eliminate the Hamas terror group. It's now been 4 months since the terror group launched an attack on Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking more than 200 hostages. I do want to talk more about all of this and really all of the latest developments on the war. So let's bring in Lawrence Rubin, an associate professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about those comments by Blinken. What are your thoughts overall? What is your take? And is that any sort of change in what we've heard from him over the last 4 months?
I don't think it's exactly say it's a gradual change or shift, but let's try to, I guess, understand a few things. One is in terms of what the intention was behind those types of comments. One, it may have been very well heartfelt that way, but it's part of this ongoing messaging from the United States to Israel saying we need to reduce this civilian casualties. There's a lot of pressure on the United States, both domestically, as we know, within the left-wing part of the Democratic Party, but also internationally, and particularly if it is, which it needs to be part of whatever solution might come next, the Arab world in particular. So the civilian casualties put this type of pressure on there. Now, it certainly did not play out very well among the Israeli population, who feels that both it's unjust to put the dehumanization of Israelis from October 7th, and then also that with the Palestinians in Gaza, although many may empathize with their position and their situation, it still kind of puts them in the same boat.
Are you surprised that there were kind of those reactions that did come in from folks in Israel after he did make those comments?
No, I'm not entirely surprised. I'm not really surprised at all. I think it's an entirely different reality in Israel from what the United States wants or expects, and maybe it's very well aware of it, but what its goals and interests are versus what Israel sees as the future. And I think in particular, the only notion right now of anything on the table of a political horizon is talking about a two-state solution, which is probably furthest from most Israelis' minds of thinking about anything at this stage, in the sense of they don't see a partner that can fulfill that role, both a corrupt Palestinian Authority or Hamas. And then, so what would govern and what would be that partner there? And so in that sense, it's not surprising in that way that that this was the type of reaction that came about.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship that has evolved here between Israel and the U.S. over the past 4 months. How has it changed overall since, let's say, October 6th and the attack that happened on October 7th versus now on February 8th?
Well, I think overall the strength of the relationship is still there. There's still a strong commitment. And I think also was surprising for many people, the strength of personally Biden's commitment to Israel and what's happened. What has changed in this sense is really just kind of the messaging so far when it comes to how Israel conducts itself in this war. And as I said, there are pressures on the United States, both domestically and internationally, from the West as well as within the Arab world, to reduce the civilian casualties. And that's where we're seeing these types of tensions. Now, the tension is going to go further there, and I think they're now really bubbling to the surface when it comes to some of Netanyahu's pushback, which plays out in domestic audiences, pushback against the Americans and what it wants to achieve, and particularly this talk about a Palestinian state or two-state solution.
We did hear from Netanyahu just yesterday, and he referred to that ceasefire hostage release deal that was proposed by Hamas, which would have included a 4.5-month pause in the fighting there in Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages. He called it, quote unquote, delusional. Your thoughts overall on that situation? Does it appear that we are now kind of heading back to square one?
I don't think it's so much square one. I think it's the beginning of a negotiation that way. This is kind of the second major set of negotiations for what might be a hostage release, and if some phased in some set of phases. So this is kind of an opening salvo of the reopening of negotiations there. But they had been going on quietly for a long period of time. This is just the most, I guess, I'll kind of sort of emphasizes a more public aspect of things. And this is really a public messaging game as well. There's so many layers that I can't understand. Many people can't really understand the closed door nature of all of these negotiations, the multiple parties that exist, and also that public messaging game that all parties are playing to varying extents.
We did hear from the Israeli government yesterday as well, as they confirmed, unfortunately, that 31 hostages of those remaining hostages, and including the ones who were actually taken prior to October 7th, have died. They are confirmed dead, possibly more as well. How does all of that factor into these negotiations for a ceasefire and release deal?
Well, there are a couple different ways. One, you could think about it in terms of reducing the numbers. Well, let me actually backtrack for a second. We think for a second about the two main aims of the war, of the elimination of Hamas and release of the hostages. And it's come to light, as many people have known from the beginning, that these are in contradiction. And so if you reduce the number of hostages that you're negotiating about, or maybe it makes it easier or less risky to lose that second part of the second goal, an equal status or less equal status. And I know it sounds very crude to put it in those types of terms, but that might be one way to think about it. On the other hand, it could also, and we see this in Israeli society now, continue to increase that domestic pressure on Netanyahu for the release of those hostages. And the other part that we see within Israeli society is there's contradictory views and also a split among those who may favor putting the aims of eliminating Hamas higher than the goal of getting the release of the hostages, and this is kind of the hard thing to reconcile, because you've got a split public on that. And sometimes it's possible, and people often do this, hold contradictory views on that issue of saying they want to do X or Y, or they may change them that way. It's such a complicated issue here. And this all bubbles up in the sense of whatever deal may or may not go through, the fragile coalition that Netanyahu has to hold and to stay in power is really dependent will be dependent on any type of deal that goes through. There's nothing that's going to be able to satisfy this type of coalition.
We've heard a lot from Netanyahu over the past several months where he has said that, quote, absolute victory is the only way to have this end here. They are going to get that absolute victory. The hostage families have kind of used those words, I don't know if you would say against him, but they say that absolute victory would actually be if the hostages were all freed. So is there kind of a divide right now that is happening between Israel and I guess Netanyahu versus the hostage families?
Oh, certainly, and that's kind of what I alluded to in the last comment, that there is this tension there, and I don't think you can get around it. And I think society itself feels this tension, and as Ed can hold these contradictory views that may be contradictory in the sense of eliminating Hamas and releasing all the hostages, and how can you do both at the same time? Which one is considered to be victory? The question is I think it's coming to light a lot more that there will have to be some type of compromise on one of these goals in some capacity, and it's going to be painful and hurtful for Israelis to be able to swallow that, but it will also have important political repercussions on the governing authority. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we are seeing, there's one of many reasons why there is no deal in that way, but that's one of the things that will hold it back, because it would be about the political future of Netanyahu and the coalition.
And that's my last question here before I let you go. Is it possible that we actually see Netanyahu ousted? We know that there were all of those different protests that were taking place across Israel, where folks were protesting against Netanyahu and his policies. Those went on for many, many weeks. Then the war did start, and those kind of stopped there. Could he possibly be ousted?
Well, I think many people have been wrong for a long time, so I won't venture a guess. It's possible. There's no question it's possible at all. There are lots of reasons why why he could be. I could spend another 15, 20 minutes, even more, to lay them out. However, he has managed to survive. He is the longest serving Israeli prime minister, and has done that in terms of his skillful manipulation of politics there. And he may continue to do that. At every step, we've seen that he's managed to stay in power. This is one, though, as pressure continues to mount, both internationally, also some of the big goals that he had set to achieve with normalizing Israel in the Arab world. The pressure continues from a lot of the Arab states to end this. The domestic pressure from the hostages, and also even from his extreme right wing, who doesn't want to see the end of this and wants to see potentially a settlement of some parts of Gaza, and even pushing or complete elimination of Hamas, as well as parts of which takes along other parts of the Israeli electorate. These are also just a few of the challenges that he will need to contend with to either stay in power or come to some type of agreement.
All right. Lawrence Rubin there, Georgia Institute of Technology. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, it's a extremely complicated situation, as we know, and what's interesting that people should kind of pay attention to is it's not just kind of focused on this region. Now we see that many, as we've seen with the Houthis, and also the PMF, the Popular Mobilized Forces in Iraq, the Shia militias, have been able to use or play this card, Palestinian Gaza card, to their advantage in terms of mobilization, framing what they do in that perspective. So I think one of the things to kind of remember is how they're using this to push against the United States. The United States is very conscious of this, and that kind of gives this broader context when you see the messaging about the Israelis, of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to say and push back. And the United States is in this challenging situation to try to manage all of those kind of all of those pressures, and make sure this region doesn't blow up and get a lot worse.
All right, Lawrence Rubin, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you very much for having me.